So today we're going to talk about what Dr. Jubb is going to teach us is very important and pertinent for our times. And that is, well, we're going to start off with him teaching us how you can win any argument.
Well, it's so amazing because logic doesn't necessarily work with someone who has conflicted parts. So many would do what they could to have gone through some logical approach, but in fact, like if someone is got conflicted parts inside, that's cognitive dissonance, and so that can inhibit someone from being able to hear what you have to say, and so the most important thing is to be able to gain rapport, because where someone has conflicted part, the only way that you're going to be able to put something there is by pacing and leading and learning how to have rapport. We all grow up as children, of course, and in the very beginning, parents say, no, don't do this, keep away from that, and all sorts of things which is about avoidance. And a child can easily have just naturally thought that the behavior that you've brought up is equivalent to their identity, which it isn't. Over time, of course, you and I, all of us, we come to realize that you're not a behavior, that's not your identity. And so that as parents could have said no to something, and then they were able to gain rapport straight away. Slow but sure, someone realizes as a child that the things that's been said that's about behavior isn't your identity at all. But then if it's not, what goes on then is conflicted parts can start to exist, which could really be cleared up if somebody looks at who they are. And where you and I, we use words like I, you, but do you really know who you is? Do you really know who I is? In investigating this, the Toltecs teach you that you have an empty center, and that's 50% of yourself, which what's forever is more real, and what's temporary is illusion more. And what's forever is empty space. And so the Toltecs teach you that this is your center, and then you just have 50% of yourself, which is care after this. So if the best thing to do for you or anyone really is to really be good at gaining rapport, and this is the way that somebody can learn how to do inductive process. Your listener really loves it that you're able to give her or him choice in what you're talking about. So as you use modal operators of possibility in what your language, so for instance, you can say, I wonder, maybe it's possible. Then you can make a statement, or you can say, that's interesting. You make a statement, and it gives the listener a choice, of course. So using words like must, should, will, won't, don't, can't, is more modal operators of necessity. So there's many things that you or anyone can do, but I'd say 90% of your communication is more analogical, and it's non-verbal. And so all of us, it behooves us to be learned more how you go about communicating, and how does your non-verbal component of what you're talking about gain rapport and assist to help marshal and sequester information. Certainly another area about this would be that you and I, out of 10,000 tonal ranges that we can take in, there's one tonal range which is your familiar voice. And it's interesting because where you're open to take in auditory information, it is because you're using your own internal dialogue. As you read something, you're using your own internal dialogue, and there's a tonal band which, as things fit more into this tonal band, there's less resistance and things. So you and I, all of us, we could be better off if we learn how to have rapport. Of course, humans are worse than horses, and it's not going to be able to lead a horse to water And so humans are worse than horses. So by gaining rapport, it's possible to pace and gain rapport and then lead and see that you could be observed to see that someone's followed. And so that's evidence that you have rapport. So rapport building, that's a really big topic of itself. Of course, you could be using terms, I could be using terms which it's better that you're putting things in terms of what someone already has within themselves. If you've got new information, you put it in terms of something that someone has. And certainly where interest is, you're going to get the full dollar there. Where there's pleasure and interest, you're getting more a full dollar out of your communion. And most could be advised that communication is the response that you're getting back, not your intention. So you really stay with the response that you're getting back, and that keeping this as an outcome, it causes you and I to be more flexible in what we do, to be able to generate behavior that assists to help you have an inductive process. So inductive process really is where someone is more receptive to take in information, and where you're looking and observing, how do you use your senses. Certainly someone who's more got an auditory, which is a mid-range sort of voice, and kinesthetic, more slower pace, slower to medium pace, you're going to cause people to be more in their listening self, whereas where the voice is raised and becomes more quick, it typically will take people more out of their body. So instruction that's given more, and voice which has a better quality to it and things, these are all things which are really important and help you. So why shouldn't all of us become better at being able to communicate ideas to people? I think there's more of a shortage of being good at communicating ideas. Right. Yeah.
So build rapport, use the right tone of voice, uh, be a better listener, obviously. These are all important things on how we can get somebody on our side.
Right. Yeah. So what's most important is that you're able to pace and lead and have rapport. And you and I, we use terms, and how commensurable are these terms? You're doing what you can to find ways to communicate, though there could be cultural differences, there could be learning differences, could be maturity difference and things. And it's better to keep things at a kindergarten level relatively, and step 1, step 2, step 3. But a true healing therapeutic really is, what instruction have you heard that you can carry out afterward that can assist to help you? Certainly where you could start to become more aware of senses in your speech. So as I go about doing, feeling, having, these are feeling kinesthetic sort of words. And to discuss, to mention, to admit, to explain is auditory, to get a clear perspective, to get a frame of reference, to show, to look. These are all visual. And genius always is because you're in a feeling mode, and then you come out of that feeling mode, which is a preferential mode, into hearing, and then into sight. So you have kinesthetic, auditory, visual in the way that you process your senses and things. And this is going to cause you to be more genius in your own self. Certainly, the quality of a voice either could energize your brain, or it could be doing things other than energizing your brain. Yeah. I think it's a great skill, and a good ability that someone has to be able to exit their communication with their eyes. So you're always being in more uptime when you're with people. And if you pull your chin in just a tiny little bit, raise your eyebrows just a little bit, you're in kid rapport, and you've got kid rapport with people. versus the chin always pushed out and looking down your nose where everybody looks much smaller where somebody does that. But it's a crossed vector. So if you pull your chin in just a tiny little bit, raise your eyebrows a little bit, you're going to be appearing better, and you're going to have kid rapport with people so that you could maybe sell your grandmother things.
So what I learned is that people rarely remember what you said. They remember more how you made them feel. Is that correct?
It's an interesting thing that when you do a study and you ask people to talk to each other, and they may not know what the outcome is, and after talking, you then ask who heard, who was the partner that you spoke to, and what did she or he come up with from what you said. Interesting that people will come up with things which they had some picture of, something which was significant to them, and that might not be something that you're aware of. But how much did someone pick up, and what listening skills that we have relates a lot to your or my capacity to be able to be free of internal dialogue. So whilst internal dialogue is there, that could have really been competing with your capacity to be able to speak, and the same even in public speaking. So where somebody is really good at public speaking, they're fantastic because they have no internal dialogue whilst they're speaking. So in life, what a good thing it is to quiet down your own internal dialogue, and become really good at tracking and be observing and sensing whether someone's in a feeling mode or they're more in an auditory mode or a visual mode, and that you have the capacity to be able to pace the sense that someone else is in, to have rapport more. So two people in a feeling mode are going to have more rapport with each other than someone who might be very auditory, not so kinesthetic and feeling. And so these two people could be missing the bus sometimes in the way they communicate. Somebody could be saying how they feel about things, and the other person could be talking about what sounds right. And so each of us can have unique ways that we process information, and the more that you're able to gain rapport with your listener, and you start to really use listen speech so that you can adjust the things that you do so that you're able to hear your own self through the other person's ears, and you can adjust the things that you're saying so that as you're speaking, you're listening through the other person's ears to yourself, and that listening through the other person's ears is adjusting you where you are in your speech. So it's called listen speech when someone is doing this. Yeah, certainly
So
some people.
yeah, so
Okay.
you're harmonizing. Basically, what you're saying is you're harmonizing energies with someone, and then once that is achieved, then you can lead them where you're going.
Well, right. So as interest and pleasure is existing, our whole brain functioning exists. Yours and my frontal cortex has grown out of anatomy that directly implicates interest. Interest and pleasure is the only way that you and we get into our frontal cortex. You have a pleasure system and you have an aversive system. Aversion as a word means to be repugnant, to avoid, to dissociate, to be inhibited. These are words which describe a state of aversion, whereas pleasure, of course, is where someone has interest and pleasure. Yours and my frontal cortex has grown directly out of anatomy that implicates interest, and so it behooves you, where you're speaking, to do what you can to cause interest and pleasure to be with what you're doing. So the choice of words, the way that you go about things is going to cause someone to be more in their frontal cortex so that they can have the capacity to be able to plan and sequence things. Also, too, where new information is being produced, it's always stored in the frontal cortex first. and then as you sleep and dream, it's transferred to the postmotor cortex area. And so, our frontal cortex is your capacity to have executive guidance, and our faculty to inspire creative influence of the future. And so it's so very important, matter of fact, that you're able to use your frontal cortex, and wherever adverseness was as a state, it can cause someone not to be in their frontal cortex much and mostly be hovering in around the brainstem. So it's better that you and we would be able to see that you've got the full dollar that you're working with versus only 50 cents on the dollar, basically.
Wow, that's a lot of information. So can you give some examples of a dialogue that you might have with somebody where you're trying to uh, where they're perhaps in a state of fight or flight, and you're trying to bring them into a more feeling state of nature and nurture. Any
Okay,
example?
yeah. Well, there's a syntax in behavior, and many strategies exist, though you yourself, that you're able to remain more in a whole brain function pattern. You remain more in your omnipresent self, where you can observe yourself and others, and you can talk to yourself in third party. Um, and so you're not the actor uh, stuck strutting back and forward on the stage, and you have awareness of perception, and uh, you want to make sure that you've been able to put things in terms of what the resource is, and you can stay outcome orientated. But it's interesting that where you or anyone are, of course, you have a frame that you wrap around things. That first frame could be a visiting frame, which, if you talk about what you would do to go further forward in where you are with anyone, as it's possible to be able to remain more in a visiting frame, which is, hi, how you doing, and it's sort of a bright moment where you open the door for someone, or you've knocked and someone opens the door for you. You just in this moment, you really are more in uptime with people and things. And so we can describe this as a visiting frame. That visiting frame should be wrapped around most everything you do, because it's going to engage you, engage your listener and people viewing our show today. So they could think about things after what we've talked about, and your environment where you are can trigger this, so that it causes a sticky factor for you, where you can see that a structure for behavioral change, or a structure for anything to occur within it, should be within first a frame of an uptime frame. So you remain in this uptime frame, and now you're wanting to do what you can, of course, to have a resource state, because that resource state is going to make sure that you've got more whole brain functioning. Wherever someone is inhibited or put into an environment which isn't conducive to their feeling of comfort, you're going to have limited mind function. So do you and I want the full dollar where you are with everyone? Well, then you to focus as you can on interest and pleasure, and have something which is resourceful. That resourcefulness is going to cause you to be in a whole brain function state. So you've got a resource state now. You can have a trust frame, and by establishing trust, it's possible for you to have rapport, and to be observed, to be seen as confident and things. Trust is very important, because a lot of issues that people have, they can only bring this out more, that trust exists about this. So you've got these three layers as you're going further in concentrically. So the first frame, as we talked about, is a visiting frame. Second frame is a resource frame. Third frame in is this trust frame. And now you're moving into what kind of outcome could we achieve? And you stay outcome orientated with your person.
So let's just interrupt
Yeah.
to get back into this resource frame. So his resource frame is can you go into more about what a resource frame is?
Yeah, so for instance, if it were very important that somebody was creative, you'd want to elicit a more creative part there, because someone might need to have to go outside the box where they've been thinking to generate behaviour that can cause you to be able to survive beyond prefix set patterns of response. So you're doing everything you can to where you are elicit a full dollar out of your listener. Also, too, in neurology, there's an all or nothing phenomenon, and providing that you can get 78% of someone's nervous system behind something, the energy is going to get passed on more. But if it was only 77%, it might really be a lot, but it's still not enough to actually cause change to occur, which requires, 78% more of the person's nervous system to be behind this.
So
Uh,
in this resource state, are you sharing resources? Are you finding
yeah,
common
you're
ground of
Yeah,
resource?
yeah, exactly. So whatever is needed for the work that you're doing, if it was creative, then you'd want to elicit a creative part uh, in your listener, so that where creativity is going to be very important to someone to go beyond outside the box where they've been. You see, so there could be a reason for you to be resourceful in a manner that you're discovering new things and exploring a new realm. And so to be in a mode more of discovery and is an important resource state for someone to go further forward. If someone wasn't really able to be in their full resource state, you'd be doing what you can to get them more into the resource state. So, for instance, where someone has a feeling and that feeling isn't necessarily resourceful, you're pacing this feeling, and you're letting the person know that you can feel that they maybe don't feel too good about what that is or something. And the person would say, yes, I don't feel too good about that. Now you can ask the person, what feeling do you have about the feeling you've had? So what you've just done is to ask a question which causes someone to be popped out of the state where they are in, into a new state. So uh, you're always looking at the syntax of the behavior itself, which is the building blocks of the behavior. And in this last situation, what we did was to pace the original feeling of something going on, and now to pop someone out of that, you're asking them what feeling do they have about that feeling, and suddenly someone's more now in their omnipresent self. So you and I, we can do that, and we can be doing that for ourselves, and you can see various things that work, and you're learning what works, and you're simply learning how to apply the things which work, and you really end up with sticky factor for things that work.
So you're basically asking someone to share something about themselves,
If it
getting in a
was,
more, you know,
oh,
you're
it,
getting them in a more open state by if someone, like you said, someone's not feeling so well, then you ask them, well, how do you feel about that feeling about not feeling so well? You're inviting them to share something a little deeper, not just what they are experiencing, but kind of what they're experiencing underneath that informs you and them something a little bit more value of that condition that you're referring to. I mean, that's kind of vague, but is that about,
okay,
is that,
so yeah, so what we did structurally was to dissociate the person from the feeling state they've had. So you yourself or anyone where you've got over something, you're dissociating away from what that feeling state was.
mm,
Um, and and so you're what you've just done structurally with someone is given them the syntax to become dissociated from where they are, so they become associated to another component of themselves where you're able then to look at the feeling. So it's a technique that's used that relates more to your great ability to learn how to dissociate and associate someone. So dissociation really is where you're able to create a bit of a distance away from something. You could put a filter there so they could see through things and feel fine about what they saw. And so there are techniques of dissociating someone away from what you would care for them. So the word away from and outside is what dissociation means. Being associated means more within and toward. So you're using direction to move away from something and towards something else. And it just is a matter that the moment that, of course, you've asked someone what feeling do they have about the feeling they've had, you've to have popped out of the feeling that you've had to have a feeling about it.
So would it be correct to say that you're bringing someone out of a thinking state and into a feeling state?
Whatever anyone does, of course, I think it's really good what you just said, is that you're doing what you can to cause the mind to fall quiet more from what you said. Because where someone's disturbed, it's because the multiplicity of things was existed, and where you still this more, you're causing someone to have no more dialogue inside their head. Yeah. So what's said that causes the mind to fall more quiet is something which you'd be caring about, right? Yeah.
It reminds me of what I once heard, that there's the old adage, there's two types of people. And in this case, there's two types of people. There's goal oriented people, and then there's balance oriented people. And is there anything you can add to that?
Yes. Well, where you have a co-created self, as you move further in this behavioral change work, we've started with those frames, and now we've gone from outcome frame. So you found out what the outcome is, and you've got a well-formed outcome, and it's positively stated. It's within someone's ability to do this. You can see it's sensorily based in a manner that you can hear within what's said that something is achieved or not, and things are ecological. So well-formedness needs to be where someone's outcome is, so that if something was being changed around, someone was no longer going to have a habit, but that was a habit that they had with others. And so how do you put things so that what resource existed remains, so that you don't have relationship counseling afterward because somebody decided to change something around, but then it didn't really work quite. Okay, so but the question relates to, if you've got people co-creating together, that's always on the outside of being challenged. So that frame of co-createdness is one that you establish and you remain, and now you go further inside, and you go inside to challenge, because you're wanting to get a full neurology of your person, and you want to get them fully behind what exists that you're caring about for behavioral change work. And so it should be that you would be challenging someone to rise to make sure that they've got the full dollar behind what they care for. Once you've got this, now you can be observed to see if you've got integratedness, and the next frame in is further deeper in is an integration frame, where you're determining whether you've achieved things or not. And so after that integration frame, then you're future pacing the change work that you've done, so that someone could be sitting, they could be standing listening, but it could be in a future moment, and something you see, hear, feel triggers your memory about this, you see. And it happens at about a thousandth of a second.
These are really leadership skills, is what I'm hearing. These are skills of how to be an effective leader. Is that right?
Yeah, well, we can be in a position always where you're doing what you can to perhaps cause others to be more excellent in themselves. And there's certainly more of a shortage of those who can be heard with their good idea. So there's plenty of good ideas, but how excellent are you at being able to put things so that someone can really hear this? Yeah.
This is not basic stuff. This is advanced level of understanding for people. So obviously you've done the work. And how did you get started in this field?
For me, I could see how incredibly important it was to be involved in human development and cause those who are interested to become more developed in themselves. And I could see many, many, many years of downloading 10 or 15 new things every day. And at the end of 4 years, you've become more expert at what you do. It was for me to see my teacher and how incredible my teacher is with people and what skills was existing. And those were all skills which I could learn, and would take a moment for me to learn all of this. But you're doing what you can in life to be more in uptime with others. And in that uptime state, you have a great sense of flexibility because the element in any system that has the greatest flexibility always is the controlling element in the system.
Wait, say that again. Say that again. That's really important.
The element in any system
that has more flexibility is the
controlling element in the system. That's right. So parents have to be very flexible with their children to generate behavior because kids themselves can be very flexible and could even be domestic terrorists, all sorts of things to get what they want. And you as a parent, you have to do what you can to be flexible in being able to generate your outcome. But if you, just as anyone, are good at what you do, you'll do what you can to stay with your outcome, stay focused with it. And so you've got a certain amount of attention and focus with things that you do. And most people appreciate this because the average person is sort of maybe 10 seconds and they're on to something else. Yeah. And all of us are living in a mode more where you're in information bites. So you've got only 3 responses where you are with someone. You can learn how to be more congruent in your response and in rapport with people that you're speaking with, and you can pace the things which you'd need to be able to have rapport, because cognitive dissonance can exist where your listener, she or he, can have had conflicted parts, and it's not easy for them to be able to hear. Shame and guilt often is because they're not doing the right thing and something is being protected there. And so a lot of things that come out of people's mouth, and it's more protective and defensive, relating to some condition that they have more inside. And for you or I to be able to recognize where someone else is and to use process and technique which is going to work with someone versus things which isn't going to really work at all. So by engaging and involving more what's interest and pleasure, you're going to stimulate more whole brain patterning. And by having more whole brain patterning, you can cause someone to be more creative, more adventurous, more explorative, and have the parts that's needed to take aboard new information. If you can pace this so that in the future something triggers this memory, you're installing this more and you're future pacing the change work that you do. And I wish that people could know how important it is. Matter of fact, your languaging and the way you've thought about something. And that's the biggest corona, really, is your own thinking and the discharge and the corona itself, and how orderly your corona is in your own self. Of course, your head, your brain, you're thinking about things. is this corona, you see. So where someone is able to see or to be good at reframing so that you can turn SH1T into roses, for instance, and be really good at this, you see. So it's a great skill that you could learn how to reframe and be really good more at reframing things. Also to take time, be cared about your verbals and your non-verbals more. Most people are not really aware of their verbals and their non-verbal. But as I said, we began 90% at least of your communication is more non-verbal. Yeah.
The gestures, perhaps. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Because when
Smile.
you right, yeah, and then if you built a state in the air, and whenever somebody was talking, they were building this stuck state, so you could know what that was, or they could too, and you make a breaker state between that, and you then start building a resource state over here, and you build the resource state large enough that it will collapse any stuck state into that, and that's a whole brain functioning principle. So as the resource state is large enough, you can collapse the stuck state into it. And it's important that you'd be able to build a resource state large enough to encompass and collapse whatever the stuck state was. So the resource state has to be larger than the stuck state. And interesting, of course, yours and my brain has grown out of, our frontal cortex has grown out of anatomy that implicates interest. And so only through interest and pleasure, in my research shows that you're using more your whole brain. Otherwise, you could only be using limited portions of the brain, because where anybody has felt pleasure, it neurologically inhibits aversion. And if somebody was having felt averse, it neurologically inhibits the pleasure centers of the brain. So these two things aren't, they are of their own self in a separate sort of system, really. And neurologically as well, and even our hemispheres process emotion and mood in a unique way. So where someone's in a pleasure and a whole brain pattern state, they have left and right hemisphere and the back of the brain with the front of the brain, the whole brain is working. Whereas wherever aversion was, it always causes limited mind function. The amygdala and tegmentum of the brain, which is adverse centers of your brain, neurologically inhibit the septal region of your brain, which connects the limbic region, emotion, with your capacity to plan and sequence things. So wherever aversion was, it simply causes limited mind function, and it can create conditions of Tourette syndrome, where someone just swears a slew of swear words one after the other. And all that's available in an adverse state is rote, learn, short sequence types of things. And so it's really important that all of us could become aware that our process engages more interest and pleasure. It's going to stimulate more whole brain patterning. And motivation is very different from just getting moved around. Getting moved around is you've got something out in front of you that you want to get, but when that's not there, that's not causing any movement much. And someone's avoiding things. And so these operative conditioning, aversion and pleasure, can only have moved someone to do things. But motivation is more where someone has an intrinsic generator built inside, and day in, day out, someone would participate in this. So these were things which I was very interested when I first came over to the United States. And I studied underneath a fellow called Frederick Herzberg, who received a lot of people out of the concentration camps in the Second World War, and was head of mental hygiene. And when I was in Australia, I was just looking around the world to see if there was someone I would like to investigate and study. And Frederick Herzberg was at the University of Utah and in the business school. And he has a theory, of course, of motivation, which where I was looking at all the various other theories of motivation, his theory was the most practical theory because he could see that what was motivating was a different set of needs that we have versus just getting moved around. So when you're learning, growing, achieving, and getting recognition, this is instinctively motivational, and you will participate in this day in, day out, whilst you've got strong motivation inside. Though if it was only just money or something, though a piece of that is to do with motivation, it's more to do with your built-in drive to avoid pain. And if you got used to an increase and suddenly all of a sudden you didn't get that increase, you'd be taking a psychological cut in what you did. You've got positive kita and negative kita. Kita, K-I-T-A, stands for a kick in the pants. And so you've got negative kita and positive kita. Positive kita is like a carrot dangled in front that's only moving you. And what you're avoiding is avoiding pain. And so that's only moving you as well. So most needs that we have relate to our built-in drive to avoid pain, and these things that only move us, but then our instinctively human beings of ourselves, we have motivational need. I mean, these needs, as I said, are more related to your learning, your achievement, your recognition, and acknowledgement. So these four areas, being within some activity that you do, it's going to be more motivating. A lot of things that people do maybe isn't necessarily motivating at all.
So this work is a part of what you teach. Oh, they're probably 30 years old now, the whole brain functioning course.
Yeah, I started in the 80s, in the early 80s, so it's nearly 40 years worth of work and things in this area. That's right. My main area was and has been doing whole brain functioning training and educating people more behavioral change technique and strategy, and teaching people about the vestibular sense, which is your sense of direction, turning, and spatial orientation, locus of control. Those submodalities relate to the vestibular sense, just like to be bright or to have contrast or color is visual, and the intonation, pitch, and rhythm is submodalities of the auditory system. And so direction, like going forward or back, is a submodality of the vestibular sense. So my work really, I've got the finest taxonomy of our sensory-motor complex on Earth, and my research was really looking into how we use our senses and our motor. So we have a sensory complex which is engaged, and in particular, it was really relate to what are the preferred modes of sorting information which allow you more to live in the whole of yourself. And so certain modes are going to cause you to be more whole brain patterned. So as you're more associated, meaning that you're moving toward things and you've got things within, it's going to be more whole brain pattern than it is to be looking at moving away from something or outside something. So if I said to you, when you asked me, how was it when I was on vacation, I said, it was really great to be on the beach or at the tennis court or something. And I've got an associated memory that I come up with versus someone who just says to you, well, I was really glad to be away from the office. And so you could probably say that the first person in there was probably had a pretty good time whilst they were away, and they have an associated memory about this, whereas who said that they were glad to be away from the office can have had a dissociated state more whilst they were away and have a dissociated state more in life. So you're learning how to use direction more in a whole brain patterned way, which is to move toward things, which is excellent. And have things within you. Whereas limited mind function is more where incongruency exists as a response, and going over things, meta responding, is a response rather than a congruent response. So you've only got 3 responses. So as you're really good with communicating, you first will always know that it's the response that you're getting back from someone that's the effect of your communication versus the things that you just said. You'll be doing listen speech as you can and hearing yourself through the other person's ears and shaping the things that you would say because you're more within the listener as you speak. You come to be good at being more engaged in all the feelings, so, and hearing and seeing and different channels that we have. And most of us, like, what you're conscious of, consciousness itself is only a very limited phenomenon. And only 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information as channels is available to you in any one moment consciously, and everything else is below consciousness. So consciousness itself is a limited phenomena, as wakefulness is a complex state a little, and there's degrees of wakefulness basically. So you've only got a congruent response where someone is, which is in rapport with the things you've said and pacing and leading, or otherwise you have a response which is going over stuff but not exiting, and that's fairly common. And otherwise you've got a polarity response, which is a don't, won't, can't, should, must, try, but, only, and the opposite of what's being said. And of course, having rapport with people, you're going to look at what you can agree with and be more in agreement as you can. And so there's only 3 responses, mate. And those 3 responses, one is a congruent response, the other is meta responding, going over stuff, and the other response is a polarized response. And you and I, we have these choices. So why not choose to have more congruent responses in your life? That's probably something very important.
So congruent response you could keep, and the other 2 you can throw away. Meta responding.
Well, yes, but you could learn how to be really good at being able to polarize and have rapport, because some people only are going to polarize in the way that they are communicating. And so you're not going to have any pattern much yourself, but you'll look and see what someone else is doing, and you have the ability to be able to apply the syntax of the other. Yeah.
So there's a usefulness. You have a usefulness to congruent response, to polar response, and is there any usefulness to meta responding then?
Meta responding, if it were given to someone, might be just that choice needs to be for someone observing, listening, feeling themselves, that they could have choice to exit from where they are. So where someone meta responded, they're meta responding, but causing the listener to really want to move out of a state of just going over stuff. But I think that you and I, all of us, we become better at being able to have congruent responses, because meta responding is really more where someone is dissociated more inside and more adverse. And certainly polarization is straight up getting memory, learning, and behavior from aversion. So where somebody learned things.
Oh, I was going to say.
Oh, go ahead.
Meta responding is a good way to not build rapport.
You could have rapport with someone who's meta responding by going over things, so you didn't challenge anything much, and all you did was to have rapport with someone that was meta responding. The most important thing would be for you to have rapport, so you could feel and see how someone's going about doing things themselves, and you apply some of that with what you do, because you could be more in rapport with your listener as a result. Yeah. But no matter what you're doing, you're teaching others to be better at processing. So the world could be around you more how you feel about things yourself. Yeah.
I got some quinoa cooking. I got to turn it off. So I'll be 1 second. That's great. I combine quinoa and wild rice together, and then I cook them, slow cook that in a crock pot for a couple hours, and
Oh
it's
yeah, fantastic. In a crock pot.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And
Oh, it's terrific.
when you smell
It
it,
is. It
it's done.
really, really
You know,
is terrific.
yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrific. Um,
what about mirroring?
oh, I was well, rapport is where you're able to pace. And so pacing is mirroring or
Pacing.
cross mirroring. Yeah, so you're pacing. That pacing is very important because it's just an instinctive thing that most everybody does. And it's what you're doing that actually causes you to have rapport with people. Yeah, right. So there's something familiar between you, right? Something as a feeling of kinship and that.
Right.
And why wouldn't you want to have this? Because you're going to be better at communicating if you do, you see. So we live in a world where those who are public speaking maybe not often aware at all, and there's so much that they could develop more themselves. Um, and my teacher called this was situ, meaning it was just an undeveloped state. And so mostly it was that the originals here saw that people were mostly more in an undeveloped state and had a lot of superstition. So the word medicine in the originals here means they use the same word for intention. So medicine means your intention, here amongst the originals. And when, of course, this new civilization came in, they were looking for something in a cabinet. And they would say that something on a shelf in a cabinet was medicine. The average original felt that this person was very superstitious, really, and they really didn't know that it's your intention more is what is your greater medicine and not something you would take, for instance, right? And that there's something far greater going on um, that's adjusted, which is the bigger picture, and that involves more your intention. So medicine and intention were the same word, um, and modern medicine to them, which I could see it, is really the art of keeping people mused while nature takes its course. And well, you and I live in a world where you could know maybe how many kilometers or miles it is to the moon, but none of these people know what natural birth is. And so with most all education and things going on really is to dumb people down and hasn't been at all to do with your uh, educating yourself in becoming better in critical thinking and being better as a person. Um, it's a parent war tactic or something that everybody who's into don't, won't, can't, should, must, try, but only is not going to get their ways out of a wet paper bag, basically. So that's a cute trick. Also, to where anybody's told that they are not good inside morally, that's a cute trick to cause someone not
And
to be able to look within themselves.
those words you just mentioned, that those are really non-committal words, right? I could, and must, should, but if only.
Right. Well,
There's no
yeah,
there's
these are
no
modal
commitment there.
operators.
Yeah.
Well, what you like anyone could be using modal operator as a possibility, which your listener, when you're using listen speech, you're always doing things in a manner that's causing your listener to have choice in the way she or he is hearing things,
Because what I
which
learned from you, what I learned from you is that, proper way to speak would be to use words, committal words like can, will, am, do, right?
okay, yeah. One thing you could say is certainly like you and I. as a society, like, do we really look at the verb that you've used? So a real verb is that's a real verb, whereas a verb that was is more dissociated away from the moment. So it behooves you and I to be more associated in our being in life, and to be congruent, meaning a parallel processedness, and to be integrated, and integration involves more pleasure and interest to cause whole brain patterning. Yeah.
And so to frame things more in the present moment
You're using
is
verbs is, yeah, that's your most important verb. Matter of fact, you could look at anyone's writing, or you could listen to them, and you could hear how much does someone into is, this is, versus
it
was
reminds
or
me of
would
it
be.
reminds me of Bill Clinton when he was asking, you know, it depends what the definition of is.
Yes, that's right. Exactly, because where someone says, what is, it is. And so that's a true verb. A verb which was, it's not is, wasn't or would be, meaning it isn't, it's not now. So if you're really wanting to make sure you're describing something that is, you'd be using words like is, certainly. And you and I and everyone, we could become better at what verb you're using and what's the tense of the verb. To be associated, we have a greater value, and value people who are more associated, being in the moment, and being in uptime with you, versus people who are more in internal dialogue and not as present. Yeah, right.
It reminds me of a phrase they use in Hawaii. If can, if no can, no can.
Yes, exactly. So you can keep it as you can, because
If
it's about what you
can.
can.
Yeah. If no
It
can,
just is,
no
because
can.
it's to do more with what you can, versus cannot is so much, it's unbelievable, it's all over the place. But what you can do is generally one thing, it's something, you see. So it should be really focus more what you can. Of course, in the word can, you've got something ecological more,
Well,
versus,
it's like the first
and
rule of improv, right? First rule of improv is don't is do not negate, because that stops the dialogue. Say no, I can't. But if you say I can, then that allows that creativity to expand and continue.
yeah, so where you could have an outcome. So where someone is into can, they're going to be outcome orientated more with the things that they're doing. And a debate team, or anyone who really is more outcome orientated, and you stay with your outcome, it's more likely you're going to be achieving this than someone who's sort of more loose and they're not outcome orientated per se. Uh, Better to be focused on what can be and what is. And so you're using verbs, which is more about your listener being associated. You could just naturally imagine that someone wants to be more associated more in their life than just to be left with topic and discussion, which cause someone to not be associated, but to have to
So
dissociate.
you can bring somebody into this state, for example, if they say, well, this might come to pass, and you answer, yes, it can. That
Well,
instead of saying,
right.
yeah, you're right, it might, and you just agree there and move on. But if say this might happen, yes, it can. But that
Yeah. So anyway, of course, you've got more positive condition of a word, like where can is and might, and so it's really that you could learn how to use words more effectively. So the word itself is used perfectly. So, for instance, try as a word always has a state of possibly failing. And then if you use this right, you might say, well, try not to have a lot of fun with these techniques over the days ahead. So that's about having a lot of fun with these techniques over the days ahead. There is no such thing as negation at our primary level of experience. And so you're learning how to use your embedded command where something is. And the meaning of try as hard as you can not to have success, it means that you're gonna have success, and you're gonna fail at failing. You're gonna have success, actually, you see. Because you just
Right.
said try not to have success, be successful. It just means that you are going to be successful, you see. So you've learned, you're using the word try properly, where most may not be necessarily really using it in a correct way, right? So
Mm.
every single word you and I use, it has a physiology, right? And why not use appropriate word? So these are things which all of it
So
that
these
we've been
words,
talking
so
about has
these,
been.
when you use these words, they go in a vestibular type of, there's a vestibular impact, right?
Yeah, vestibular meaning you've got a direction within what's said. That's vestibular. So that could be moving towards something which is
Mm.
associated,
Right.
or having moved away from something. Um, and something could be parallel processed. So you've got congruency in the processing, or it could be integrated. Um, Integration meaning you've got pleasure and interest, which integrates your neurology more, right? Yeah. So all of us are better that we can create a world around us where you're using more listen speech yourself as you go about things. Um, and we live in a world which a lot of superstition is, and uh, conditioning placed over people, because the media is owned, and we have the largest concentration of ownership of media just about in the world here at the moment. And you can have a nefarious agenda just being placed over everyone, where information isn't really being received or given. And so informed consent can't be either. So the more that someone is able to pace circumstance, um, the more you're able to be garnered of your listener's attention. So wherever anything was that was upsetting or something, it can be inhibiting someone from being able to hear what is. But if you're able to pace the way someone feels, and you can now cause them to come along with you. But that's why rah-rah, where somebody's a public speaker and they've got a lot of rah-rah, that rah-rah doesn't really connect to people who have grief or loss. And
Mm.
grief and loss can be the single most maturing emotion, where because you're doing what you can to integrate what's lost. So that's what grief is. Um, and so where someone is in grief, but you're in rah-rah, it could be not pacing and leading where your audience is. So it's so very important that one can feel what's going on with the audience, feel what's going on with the listening, feel what's going on in the moment, and be able to speak to and address some of this. And you're pacing how your audience or someone feels, and then you can lead them somewhere. But otherwise, it could be a true mismatch of stuff going on. Um, yeah, because as I said, it's not pacing where someone feels inside themselves, right? So the biggest thing we could get out of all of this would be first that interest and pleasure create whole brain functioning. And if you establish a framework for people to feel more in interest and pleasure, you're going to get the full dollar out of them more. Whereas where those are adverse, or the system that's engages aversion, it is going to create more limited mind function always.
So when you teach whole brain functioning, how long of a course is that? How long does it take somebody to really, whether master these tools is a good word, or rather make these tools useful for themselves? Is this
Yeah,
a
there's
long
so
course?
much that you could learn, but you would begin by learning about induction itself and learning how others become inducted, because you want yourself to be really good at being able to give induction. an inductive process. So you start to learn many, many ways of using various inductive process and things. You become very good at using an inductive process.
What's
So,
what's the definition of inductance?
well, it inductive process is how does someone come to be receptive, and
Hmm.
you want someone to be receptive. So it behooves you to find ways to cause others to be receptive, though you could be doing things more analogical, not and non-verbal. And so, for instance, an example of a leverage induction is pairing something that's occurring on the outside uh, with a state going on internal. So as somebody observes something happening on the outside, they're achieving something inside. That's called a leverage induction. So, for instance, eclipse movement, it's an idiomotor dynamic that where someone sees the eclipses and they're reminded of these eclipses which are coming up in its time, we could be thinking about what do we need to clear away that's old to make way for what's new. We live in a world where we should become more sophisticated. We live in a world which should be positively economically inducted, not negatively inducted. We live in a world where you can see that verified conditioning needs to be, because lying through the senses is licentious, and giving someone ability to do something which none of us can do. That's what licentious means in a license. Um, it's real low order of things where you certify or you license. This is not verified at all. So all of us, we're living in a world where most are truly caring right now to have more verified information, and they're fed up with owned media putting a paintbrush over everything, which is so obvious. Um, a lot of people, if you do a survey, you'll see are tuning out uh, because the hard sell, the paintbrush and painting everything one color is obvious to the average person. And they're fed up with that, matter of fact, really fed up with it. So I'm not sure what could be achieved by anyone by doing that. You're only causing people to move away from who that messenger is, really. Right. So you and I, we can appreciate having informed consent, and that whatever process causes you and I to have more informed consent about things is very important, because we can only have a society and a governance and things where we, the people, really are more aware of things that's going on. And the media has a responsibility to provide you and I with information that, but it's not doing that when it's owned and controlled utterly, which nowhere in our broadest interpretation of uh, having what's called a demonocracy, or it really is more to do with your and my capacity to be of informed consent and have participation in the political process. But if you and I, we don't have any verified condition at all, um, it's going to be pretty bad, because nothing is got anyone behind it. So that's a problem. Where something is verified, you've got someone living behind what this is, versus there isn't anyone living behind it. There's only an orifice, an office, which is a fiction. Yeah. But I mean, whole brain functioning, the things that you would learn, and it takes time, but you do learn more what's real versus fictional. So words and ways you're thinking can be real or could be more fictional. Uh, and uh, Mary and Ralph and Roger and these people are real, whereas Alphabet Soup Land isn't. Now, Mary, Ralph, and Roger can get harmed, injured, costed, and damaged, um, but a state can't. It can't, you see. So, but putting these things in the same breath, that Alphabet Soup Land is what was injured or something when alphabet Soupland can't be injured, but Mary, Ralph, and Roger can be. So
Well, to even
alphabet
understand these
Soupland is a fiction.
to even understand these concepts, it would take whole brain functioning. So would you say a year is enough time for someone to, if they're diligent in studying the materials of whole brain functioning? I know there's a few
Yeah,
few
I
books.
think that probably maybe 4 years,
Mhm.
maybe 4 years, mate. Uh, yeah, because there's so much that one could learn. So you want to know about whatever selective restrictive violation is that's going on, meaning that something is going on in the processing, which is a violation of the way we would ordinarily process information. So um, where many are using nouns instead of a verb, that's called nominalization. And so something could sound rational, but it's really not logical at all. It just sounds like smooth. And so nominalizations is where someone has used a noun instead of a verb, and it can hide the performative part of the verb by calling it a noun. And we don't get at the performative component of the verb by using a noun instead. So by saying, what does it mean to you to be democratic? And so you're using the word as a verb,
Right.
where versus you are a Democrat or something, which
Right.
is a
And
noun.
so it's one time you told me, someone came up to you and said, I am love, and you corrected them and say, there's no such thing. You can be loving, but you are not love.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's an example. Uh, so
So this isn't this
you
isn't
also
weekend work. This isn't weekend workshop stuff. This is really a life path and a commitment to better yourself over
well, you
time.
first yeah you first realize that pleasure and interest is very important in create whole brain patterning. That's the first thing, and that aversion always causes more limited mind function. Um, you're starting to look at what those selective, restrictive types of violations are going on, where someone has used a process which really isn't logical. So, in those places where impoverishment exists, you can get at where the impoverishment is by tuning into what is unspecified, so that you can get that more specified, cause your listener or your speaker to be able to have more choice. So, of course, the selective restrictive violations that are going on in most people's language could be certainly nominalizing and using unspecified verbs, not knowing where the referential index is, not having a referential index, so one doesn't know if this is coming from me, coming from you, coming from someone else, involving someone else or you. Who is it involving? Is a missing referential index, and then you have complex equivalence, where someone has said, "Oh, hugging is equivalent to love," where there might be many things which is equivalent to love, but one wasn't hugged. So then they've made a complex equivalent to say that they weren't loved, where many, many things did occur for them. And then you've got selective restrictive violations. So, like somebody, if you said, this tomato plant is feeling happy, you and I, we're attaching to our ongoing experience the meaning of that. So you can think moi feels happy, though a tomato plant can't be feeling happy. It's sort of the use of a selective restrictive violation in
Mm.
to your advantage. So you're learning how to use all these techniques and things more to your advantage, and how to become more masterful at communicating. It really is something which, where I look at the people who taught me, I can see such an unbelievable condition in my teacher. That was something which I could achieve. Eventually, I would achieve this. But I apprenticed for 4 years, and then I went on the road for another 5 years with my teacher. And it's a matter that you could have someone who really could assist to help you become more personally developed yourself. And
What
I reckon there's a lot of room for this.
I would say so, especially now more than ever. What's the definition of aversion?
Of aversion: avoidance, repugnance, dissociatedness, inhibitedness, uh, only that you could say away from and outside. Um, uh, Adverse is really everything that you could think might be negative more versus positive. So you've got these two states: pleasure and interest stimulate whole brain functioning and get you into your frontal cortex. And so the trick is, how could you feel interested in this, and how could you have pleasure within it? And that's allowing you to be able to be using your frontal cortex. So you've got the faculty to inspire creative influence of the future people you're talking with. You've
So
got your,
an averse person would be somebody that keeps it in. It does has an inability to share what they're feeling, and is someone that's guarded of their feelings. Essentially, that's one type of averse condition. Would that be correct?
yeah, well, uh, every emotion is intelligent. What's intelligent is that you can express and be in an emotion, though you're not remained in any one emotion at all.
Well,
So each emotion has
if you have a
intelligence.
fear, if you have a fear of sharing emotion, then then the root of that is what is the root of that?
Well, most, if they have a fear, it's because of some vulnerability
Mm.
and feeling vulnerable more. And where many can have had the rug pulled out from underneath them, though they've been in a very great support position for many others, they can have the experience of the rug being pulled out from underneath them, and they can
Right.
have um, experience of not necessarily being supported by a family and things. But where you can have the experience of seeing people actually work as a family to assist, to help support you, you're reframing your own sense of what you can do and what is a potential. And you're growing in your capacity to see a potential and have a brighter light. And that you and I, we could apply this to be able to have a bright light next to whatever perhaps is dread. Because if only dread was, but you don't show what bright light exists, you're doing what you can other than to cause people to be more in their whole brain patterned conditioning. So it's interesting because our anatomy that allows you to be able to plan and sequence things has only grown from interest and pleasure. And what's positive is really only ever +1. And what's negative always is -5. The brain has set up more to Teflon what's good and Velcro what's negative. Um, and you, it's so we can understand why that's so. It is because what we need to avoid truly could be saving us, and nobody really needs to have something more and more positive per se. Which what's positive is positive, and it's good enough in and of itself. You can't make that better. Um, so in neurology, in other words, the things that could have been more adverse is in a bank account, a larger bank account, because it's -5, whereas what's positive is only +1. So to build a resource state large enough to collapse a stuck state into it, you chain states together and anchor those states together. So then you're firing off that anchor, and it fires off that chain that's within. And there could be 4 or 5 positive things that in the value of that. And so that part that's built, that's got these 5 parts within it, which is positive, is a resource large enough to be able to collapse the stuck state into it. So you're doing what you can to be more a engineer, an architect, learning about behavioral syntax and things, becoming better at this, it's true that most people really are not learning what our sensory motor complex is. Certainly they've never heard anyone talk about the subject like what we're talking about today. Yeah. So anyway,
New information.
I reckon we should maybe have a show on a regular basis, mate. Do you think that might be something interesting?
I think so, especially that this is not material that can just. This is something that has to be reinforced continually with someone, much like learning to play an instrument.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And every time you go back through something like this, it's possible really to pick up things that you didn't pick up in the first time around. But
Well,
being
I just
open,
yeah, I just learned why it's such a challenge to reframe everything into a positive state based on this -5 + 1. You know,
right,
really explains a lot.
yes, yes, you've got to, yeah, chain states of anchors together to achieve a large enough resource state is exactly right. So you're caring about rapport, you're doing things in a manner that's below consciousness, because you can keep rapport if something in themselves is to, how to do something per se. Yeah, so you're more natural in everything that you do. Yeah. Well,
This has been
anyway,
this has been
I'll get.
fascinating. It's always and I've heard you talk about this, to me personally over the years. So I've been on the receiving end of
Yeah,
some phenomenal information. But every time you repeat it, you're right. I pick up something new. So it's phenomenal. It's fantastic.
right. Yeah, so learning how to track sensory-based information and getting sensory-based information in your tracking and learning how to track, one can start to learn how to use whole body calibration and be able to see what the neurology is inside by what accessing cues someone has used on the outside. Um, you're learning all these techniques of inductive process. You're learning various techniques of reframing. You're learning techniques of a behavioral change work that we talked a little bit about in the beginning, and putting those frames around things till you get to the eighth frame, which is this future pacing, what the changes that you're caring about and things. Anyway, I'll let you get on with your things that you're doing in the day today, and
Thanks. I
perhaps we'll be looking forward to catching up with each other in a short moment. And I'm glad for you to reach out and want to do an interview. Yeah.
I what I I'll wrap this up by in the beginning I said Dr. Jubb is going to teach us how to win any argument, and what I've learned from this is the way you do that is to remove the argument.
Yeah, that's right. That teachers are so good at it. You certainly got to be good at knowing what slippery slope is so that that could be corrected. Teachers are really good where little or Mary or someone has used slippery slope. They've they've gone on to something, but it involves them having a fact, which the fact doesn't exist. So slippery slope is a big one that's going on at the moment. Ad hoc reasoning is another where someone's given two alternatives, polarized, and the last one is what most people are going to want to polarize to, and but yet both alternatives are not anything that you would have as your outcome. So that's called being taken by a straw man argument. And then you've got ad hoc reasoning because something happened before something else. People think in terms of cause and effect, where that's not so at all. And then you've got bootstrap reasoning, where someone's just using circular reasoning. Everybody knows that Hanukkah or Christmas is good because everyone feels that. It's sort of really just circular reasoning. So being very good at knowing what the fallacious types of reasoning is and things, I think you can have better success by truly being able to gain rapport with people as you can. You're going to get a lot better and more in life by doing this. Where the average person is very narcissistic, very, very self-centered, and have conflicting parts inside typically, which causes them to have guilt and shame, and so they can't have remorse for what someone else feels, because that would be feeling weak themselves. But understanding the complex of things, I think it's a really great one to be aware of. Anyway, I love you, mate, and let's catch up to each other in a future show. Yeah,
Much
and I hope
love,
everybody's
David.
enjoyed the show, and let's see if people enjoyed it. Let's do some more.
Always
Thank you,
enlightening.
mate.
Thank you. Until next time. Good night.